The message came at 3 in the morning, Earth time. Juan was already awake, standing by the window of his apartment in Geneva, watching the early morning traffic below. The blue light from his communication device cast strange shadows across his face as he read the urgent transmission from the Galactic Council. Immediate attendance required. Emergency peace talks. Nexus Prime Station. Human delegation requested by all parties. Huang read the message 3 times before it sank in. The 3 most powerful alien civilizations in the galaxy were about to go to war, and somehow they wanted humans involved in stopping it. This made no sense to him. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. They were still learning how things worked out there among the stars. He dressed quickly and made his way to the United Colonial Defense Force headquarters. The building was buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Admiral Chun was already in the main briefing room, looking tired but alert. Several other officials were gathered around a large holographic display showing the galaxy's political map. "Huang, good, you're here," Admiral Chun said without looking up. "We've got a situation. The Vorthek Empire, the Zealoth Collective, and the Morvani Federation are on the edge of war. Their fleets are already moving into position. The Council estimates that if fighting breaks out, it could spread across half the galaxy." Juan studied the display. Red markers showed Vorthak military forces, blue showed the Zealoth, and green represented the Morvani. The positions looked like a 3-way standoff, with each faction's territory forming rough triangles around strategic star systems. "Why do they want us there?" Juan asked. "We're the newest members of the Council. We don't have the experience for something this big." "Admiral." Chun finally looked at him. "That's what I asked." The Council representative said all 3 factions specifically requested human mediation. They wouldn't explain why. Dr. Yuna entered the room carrying a thick data pad. She was Earth's leading expert on alien biology and psychology, and her insights had proven valuable in previous diplomatic missions. "I've been reading the background files," she said. "This conflict has been building for decades. It started as a trade dispute over rare minerals, but it's grown into something much bigger." She activated a secondary display showing economic data. The Vorthik need these minerals for their weapons manufacturing. The Zealoth use them in their biotechnology. The Morvani claim historical rights to the mining systems. Each faction has valid claims, but they can't agree on sharing. Kang walked in as she was speaking. He was a military strategist who had earned his reputation during the border conflicts with the Centauri pirates. His job was to understand how wars started and how they could be stopped. "I've been looking at their fleet movements," he said. "This isn't just about minerals anymore. Each faction is positioning for total dominance in this sector of the galaxy." Admiral Chun nodded grimly. "That's what makes this so dangerous. If they start fighting, other civilizations will be forced to choose sides. The whole galactic community could split apart." "When do we leave?" Juan asked. "Your ship departs in 6 hours," Admiral Chun replied. "The Council has provided safe passage through all 3 factions' territory. They really want you there quickly." Juan spent the next few hours preparing. He reviewed files on each alien civilization, studying their cultures, their leaders, and their negotiation styles. The Vorthak were warriors who respected strength and direct communication. The Zealoth were a hive mind that made decisions through collective consciousness. The Morvani were ancient and proud, with complex social hierarchies and long memories. As he read, something bothered him. These were old, experienced civilizations that had been dealing with galactic politics for thousands of years. Why would they want humans, who had barely learned to travel between star systems, to help solve their biggest crisis? The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 days. The space station was located in neutral territory, designed specifically for diplomatic meetings. It was huge, with multiple docking bays and conference facilities that could accommodate different atmospheric and gravitational needs. During the flight, the human team continued their preparations. Yuna studied biological data on each alien species, looking for insights into their psychology and decision-making processes. Kang analyzed their military capabilities and strategic positions. Juan practiced different negotiation approaches, trying to anticipate what might work with each faction. "Something feels strange about this," Yuna said on the second day. "I've been reading reports from previous human diplomatic missions. In every case, the aliens seem nervous around our negotiators. Not hostile, exactly, but darkful. Careful." "How?" Juan asked, like they were afraid of making mistakes. Like they thought humans might trick them somehow. Kang looked up from his military analysis. "That matches what I'm seeing in the strategic reports. When humans are involved in negotiations, the aliens tend to over-prepare. They bring extra advisors, run more simulations, double-check everything. But why?" Juan wondered. "We've never done anything to make them afraid of us?" As they approached Nexus Prime, they could see the massive alien fleets in the distance. Vorthak battleships looked like giant metal spears, bristling with weapons. Zealoth vessels were organic-looking, grown rather than built, with flowing curves and biomechanical components. Morvani ships were elegant and ancient, their hulls inscribed with symbols that told stories of thousand-year voyages. What struck the humans immediately was the positioning. The three fleets maintained careful distances from each other, as expected. But they also kept unusual distances from the human ship. Even the docking bay assignments seemed designed to keep the human delegation separate from the others. "Are we in quarantine or something?" Kang asked as their ship approached its assigned dock. "The atmospheric scans show no biological hazards," Yuna reported. "All the standard diplomatic protocols are being followed." Juan watched through the viewport as they docked. Alien personnel moved efficiently around the station, but he noticed that whenever a human was visible on their ship's external cameras, the aliens would pause and watch. It reminded him of how people might watch a dangerous animal at a zoo with interest, but from a safe distance, the docking completed with mechanical precision. As they prepared to disembark, Admiral Chun's final message came through on their communication system. "Remember, your job is to find a peaceful solution that all three factions can accept. The galaxy is counting on you, and be careful. Something about this situation doesn't feel right." Juan gathered his team. "Whatever's going on here, we'll figure it out. Our job is to prevent a war. Everything else is secondary." As the airlock opened and they stepped onto Nexus Prime, Juan could feel eyes watching them from every direction. The station's main corridor was filled with aliens from dozens of different species, but conversations seemed to stop as the humans walked past. Whispered discussions resumed in their wake. Yuna leaned close to Juan. "Did you notice that? They're not just watching us, they're discussing us." "Maybe they're curious about the new species," Kang suggested, but his hand instinctively moved closer to his sidearm. "Maybe," Juan replied, but he didn't believe it. Something was happening here that none of them understood yet. The aliens had specifically requested human mediation, but their behavior suggested they were more afraid than grateful. As they made their way toward the main conference center, Juan realized that this mission was going to be unlike anything they had experienced before. The fate of the galaxy might depend on understanding why these ancient civilizations both needed and feared human involvement in their affairs. The conference center's doors opened before them, revealing a vast chamber where the representatives of three mighty civilizations waited. And despite all their power and experience, Huang could see something in their alien faces that he had never expected to find. They looked nervous. The main conference hall of Nexus Prime was designed to impress. The ceiling stretched high above them, showing a holographic display of the galaxy with all its civilizations marked in different colors. 3 separate seating areas had been arranged for each faction, with a neutral zone in the center where the human delegation would sit. Juan entered first, followed by Yuna and Kong. The moment they stepped into the hall, all conversation stopped. Representatives from dozens of alien species turned to stare at the 3 humans walking across the polished floor. The Vorthak delegation sat on the left side of the hall. They were large, powerful beings with thick gray skin and pronounced ridges along their foreheads. Their leader, General Vex, was a veteran of countless battles. Scars marked his arms and face, telling stories of wars fought across the galaxy. He wore a dark uniform covered with military decorations. As Juan approached to offer a traditional greeting, General Vex did something unexpected. He stepped backward. It was just a small step, barely noticeable, but Juan caught it. This was a being who had faced enemy armies without flinching, and he was backing away from a handshake. "General Vex," Juan said, extending his hand anyway. "I'm Ambassador Juan. We're honored to be here." The general looked at the offered hand for several seconds before reluctantly taking it. His grip was firm but brief, and he released Juan's hand quickly. "Ambassador," he said in heavily accented Standard Galactic, "your reputation precedes you." The way he said reputation made it sound like a disease. Juan moved to the center area where the Zelith delegation waited. The Zelith were different from any other species in the galaxy. They were a hive-mind individual bodies that shared a collective consciousness. Their representative, Drone Speaker Prime, looked like a tall, thin humanoid with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. "Drone Speaker Prime," Juan said. "Thank you for requesting our participation in these talks." The Zealoth's response came in a voice that seemed to carry echoes of many speakers. "The collective has studied human diplomatic methods extensively. Ambassador Juan, your species demonstrates unique approaches to conflict resolution." Again, there was something strange in the tone. The Zealoth usually spoke in flat, emotionless voices, but Juan detected what might have been anxiety in the harmonic undertones. The Morvani delegation occupied the right side of the hall. They were an ancient race, tall and elegant, with pale skin and silver hair. Their civilization was older than human recorded history. Elder Counselor Vex stood as Juan approached. She wore flowing robes covered with symbols that told the story of her people's long journey across the stars. "Elder Vex," Juan said, offering a respectful bow in the Morvani style. "Ambassador," she replied, returning the bow but keeping her distance. "The Morvani Federation has great interest in observing human negotiation techniques. Your people have achieved remarkable results in such a short time." Remarkable results, another phrase that didn't sound like a compliment. As the opening ceremony began, Juan noticed more strange behavior. Alien staff members who should have been focused on the preparations instead kept glancing at the human delegation. Security personnel positioned themselves where they could watch the humans as much as they watched for threats. Even the stations. Artificial intelligence seemed to be paying extra attention to the human section of the hall. The ceremony itself was traditional. Each delegation presented their credentials and stated their commitment to finding a peaceful solution. But when Juan stood to speak for humanity, the atmosphere in the room changed. The background conversation stopped completely. Every alien in the hall turned to listen. "The human delegation is honored to participate in these historic talks," Juan began. "We come here with respect for all parties and hope for a solution that serves the interests of peace throughout the galaxy." It was a standard diplomatic opening, nothing unusual. But as Juan spoke, he noticed reactions that puzzled him. General Vex frowned and whispered something to his advisor. Drone Speaker Prime's large eyes seemed to narrow slightly. Elder Vex watched Juan with the intensity of someone studying a dangerous puzzle. After the ceremony, there was a reception where the delegations could meet informally. This was usually when real negotiations began, through casual conversations and private discussions. But tonight, the reception felt more like a dance where everyone was trying to avoid stepping on each other. Yuna approached a group of junior Zealoth representatives. They were normally eager to discuss scientific topics, but tonight they seemed reluctant to engage. When she mentioned human research into biotechnology, one of them actually backed away from the conversation. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "The collective is cautious about sharing technical information with human researchers," one of the Zealoth replied. "Your species has a talent for finding applications that we do not anticipate." Kang had a similar experience with Vorthek military officers. They usually enjoyed discussing strategy and tactics, but tonight they deflected his questions and changed the subject whenever he brought up military matters. You study our battle histories, one officer finally admitted, but you see patterns that we do not see. It makes us uncomfortable. The most revealing conversation happened when Juan found himself alone with a junior Morvani diplomat named Nara. She had been drinking Morvani wine, which apparently made her more talkative than usual. "Can I ask you something, Ambassador?" she said quietly. "Why do humans always win?" "Win what?" Juan asked. "Everything. Every negotiation, every treaty. Every time humans are involved in diplomatic talks, they get what they want. Sometimes they get things they weren't even asking for." Juan was genuinely surprised. "I'm not sure what you mean." "We try to find solutions that work for everyone." Nara laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's exactly what makes it so frightening. You always find solutions that work for everyone, but somehow humanity always benefits the most. Do you even realize you're doing it?" Before Juan could respond, Elder Vex appeared at Nara's side. "Nara, you should return to our delegation area," she said firmly. The younger diplomat left quickly, but not before giving Juan a look that mixed fear with curiosity. "You must forgive her," Elder Vex said to Juan. "The younger generation sometimes speaks without proper consideration." "She seemed concerned about human diplomatic methods," Juan said. "Is there something we should know?" Elder Vex studied him for a long moment. "Tell me, Ambassador, have you studied the results of human peace negotiations over the past 50 years? "Of course. We've been successful in resolving several disputes." "Successful, yes, but have you noticed the pattern? The Altair mining dispute resolved in humanity's favor. The Centauri trade agreement resulted in preferential treatment for human merchants. The Proxima border settlement gave humans access to previously restricted space lanes." Juan frowned. "Those were all fair solutions. All parties agreed to the terms." "Yes," Elder Vex said quietly. "They all agreed. That's what makes it so remarkable. Somehow, when humans negotiate, everyone walks away thinking they got a fair deal. It's only later that they realize how much humanity gained in the process." She paused, watching his reaction. "We have studied your species' history extensively, Ambassador. Your diplomatic methods are quite unique. You have a saying on your world: the house always wins. In galactic diplomacy, humans appear to be the house." Elder Vex walked away, leaving Juan alone with his thoughts. Around him, the reception continued, but he began to see it differently. The Vorthak delegation clustered together, occasionally glancing at the humans. The Zealoth representatives spoke in rapid, quiet tones among themselves. Even the Morvani, usually confident and composed, seemed to be discussing strategy rather than enjoying the evening. Slowly, a disturbing realization began to form in Juan's mind. These three powerful civilizations hadn't requested human mediation because they trusted humanity's neutrality. They had requested it because they were afraid of what might happen. If humans got involved without being officially invited, better to have humans at the negotiating table, where they could be watched, than to risk them finding other ways to influence the outcome. As the reception ended and the delegations returned to their quarters, Juan gathered his team for a private discussion. They had a lot to figure out before. The real negotiations began tomorrow. "I think we have a problem," he told Yuna and Kong. "The aliens aren't nervous about the war. They're nervous about us." The next morning, Juan decided to investigate. While Yuna and Kong prepared for the formal negotiations, he took a walk through the station's commercial district. Nexus Prime was more than just a diplomatic facility. It was a small city in space, with shops, restaurants, and entertainment areas where beings from across the galaxy could interact. The coffee shop he chose was busy with the usual mix of species found on neutral stations. Traders, journalists, station workers, and low-level diplomatic staff all mingled together. Juan ordered a simple coffee and found a table where he could listen to conversations around him. At first, he heard the expected chatter about trade routes, family news, and local politics. But as he listened more carefully, he began to notice something else. His name kept coming up in conversations. Heard the human sent himself. That single quotes as the one who handled the Centauri situation. My cousin was there during the mining negotiations. Says Juan made it look easy, but afterward nobody could figure out how humans got so much. Juan pretended to read his datapad while listening. A group of Altarian merchants at the next table were having an especially interesting discussion. I was there when they negotiated the trade agreements, one was saying. The humans seemed so reasonable, always asking questions, always wanting to understand our position. They made us feel heard. So what's the problem? Another asked. The problem is that when we signed the deal, we thought we were getting everything we wanted. It wasn't until months later that we realized how much we had given up. The humans got access to our shipping routes, our supply chains, even our customer lists. All perfectly legal, all part of the agreement we signed. But didn't you read the contract? Of course we read it. But somehow the humans had written it so that every clause served multiple purposes. What looked like a simple trade provision actually gave them strategic advantages we never considered. Juan moved to another area of the coffee shop where a different group was talking. These were Vortex civilians, rare to see them outside. Military context, but Nexus Prime attracted all types. My brother serves on General Vex's staff, one was saying. He says the general has been studying human military history for months, preparing for these talks. Studying their wars? No, studying their peace treaties. Apparently, humans are more dangerous when they're making peace than when they're making war, the other Vorthek laughed, but it sounded nervous. How can peace be dangerous? Think about it. When you fight humans, you know what you're facing. They're good warriors, but so are we. But when they negotiate ... that's when they're truly frightening. They can make you agree to things that seem perfectly reasonable, and only later do you realize you've been outmaneuvered. Juan left the coffee shop with his head spinning. He found Yuna in the station's scientific library, researching biological stress markers in different alien species. Yuna, I need to ask you something, he said. Have you ever noticed anything unusual about how aliens react to human negotiators? She looked up from her research. Actually, yes. I've been studying the biological data from our previous diplomatic missions. Alien stress hormones consistently spike during negotiations with humans. At first, I thought it was just normal tension from difficult talks. But now I'm not so sure. The stress patterns are unusual. They're not showing signs of anger or frustration. They're showing signs of fear mixed with confusion, like they're trying to solve a puzzle that keeps changing. Yuna brought up a holographic display showing biological readings from various alien species during past human negotiations. Look at this data from the Proxima border talks. The alien representative's stress levels started low and gradually increased throughout the negotiations, even though the talks were going well. Why would successful talks cause more stress? Juan asked. Because they were beginning to realize they were being outmaneuvered, but they couldn't figure out how. Juan found Kang in the Military Analysis Center, reviewing strategic reports. Kang was studying deployment patterns of the 3 fleets currently facing off around Nexus Prime. Kang, I need your perspective on something, Juan said. From a strategic standpoint, what do you think the aliens are really afraid of? Kang leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking about that. These are 3 of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. They've fought wars against each other for centuries. But they're all afraid of 3 humans with no weapons and no fleet, he gestured to the strategic display. Look at these positions. The fleets are maintaining defensive formations not because they're afraid of each other, but because they're afraid of what might happen during these negotiations. What do you mean? I think they're afraid that somehow, by the time these talks are over, humans will have gained military access to their territories, or intelligence about their capabilities, or strategic advantages they haven't even considered. Yet, Kang pulled up historical data on previous human diplomatic missions. Every time humans have been involved in peace talks, both sides have walked away thinking they got a fair deal. But if you analyze the long-term consequences, the display showed a map of human influence across the galaxy. Over the past 50 years since first contact, humanity had gone from controlling one small solar system to having trade agreements, military partnerships, and diplomatic relationships throughout the galaxy. It's not that we conquered anyone, Kong said, it's that we made friends with everyone. And somehow, our friends keep giving us things we need. That afternoon, Juan decided to be direct. He arranged private meetings with junior staff from each alien delegation. These were the people who did the actual work of preparing for negotiations, and they often had insights their superiors missed. The first meeting was with a young Vorthek intelligence analyst named Rex. He was nervous about meeting alone with a human, but Juan's friendly manner eventually put him at ease. "Can you help me understand something?" Juan asked. "Why does everyone seem so concerned about human involvement in these talks?" Rex looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Because your people are too good at this," he said. "Finally, we've studied every human peace negotiation for the past 50 years. You never lose. We try to find solutions that work for everyone. That's exactly the problem," Rex said, becoming more animated. "You find solutions that work for everyone, but somehow humanity always benefits the most. Do you know what we call it in Vorthak? The human trap? The human trap? It's when you're negotiating with humans and everything seems reasonable and fair, but you have this growing feeling that you're missing something important. Like there's a larger game being played that you don't understand." Juan met with a Zealoth analyst named Zix next. The conversation was different because the Zealoth communicated through their collective consciousness, but the message was the same. The collective has run thousands of simulations trying to predict the outcome of these negotiations, Zix explained. In every scenario where humans are involved, we achieve our stated objectives but lose strategic advantages we didn't know we had. Can you give me an example? The Altair mining agreement. The mining companies got access to new resources. The local government got economic development. Everyone was happy. But the humans structured the agreement so that they gained access to rare materials needed for their new space drive technology. Materials that weren't even mentioned in the negotiations. How is that possible? Because humans don't just negotiate for what they need today. They negotiate for what they might need in 10 years or 50 years. You plan further ahead than any other species in the galaxy. The meeting with the Morvani representative, a young historian named Cal, was the most revealing. The Morvani had been studying galactic politics for thousands of years, and they had noticed patterns that others missed. "Ambassador, may I speak freely?" Cal asked. "Of course." The Morvani have detailed records of diplomatic activities across the galaxy for over 3,000 years. In all that time, we have never encountered a species that consistently achieves their objectives through negotiation the way humans do. Cal activated a historical display showing diplomatic relationships across time. Most species negotiate to avoid losing. They're trying to minimize damage or maintain the status quo. But humans negotiate to win. Every negotiation is an opportunity to improve your position. That doesn't sound unusual. It is when you're as good at it as humans are. Most species who try to win every negotiation end up making enemies or being seen as untrustworthy. But somehow, humans make everyone feel like they're being treated fairly, even when they're being outmaneuvered. Cal paused, choosing his words carefully. "We believe it's because humans understand something about negotiation that other species don't. You understand that the real victory isn't getting what you ask for. It's getting what you need while making the other party think they got what they wanted." As evening approached, Juan returned to his quarters with a much clearer picture of what was happening. The three alien civilizations hadn't requested human mediation because they trusted humanity's neutrality. They had requested it because they were afraid of what humans might accomplish if they weren't directly involved in the process. Better to have humans at the negotiating table, where their actions could be monitored than to risk them. The formal negotiations began the next morning in the main conference hall. The three alien delegations sat in their assigned areas, with teams of advisors, military experts, and legal specialists. The human delegation occupied the neutral zone. In the center, just the three of them facing representatives of civilizations that controlled thousands of star systems, Huen opened with standard diplomatic protocols, thanking everyone for their commitment to peace. But as he spoke, he began to notice the subtle patterns that his conversations yesterday had prepared him to see. When he suggested they begin by having each faction state their core objectives. General Vex hesitated before responding. The Vorthak leader looked to his advisors as if checking for traps in such a simple request. The Vorthic Empire requires secure access to the mineral resources of the disputed systems, General Vex said carefully. These materials are essential for our defensive capabilities. Huan nodded and made notes on his datapad. Security and defense are certainly legitimate concerns. Can you help us understand what level of access would meet your needs? It was a reasonable question, but General Vex's advisors immediately began whispering among themselves. They were analyzing every word, looking for hidden meanings or implications they might have missed. Drone Speaker Prime spoke next for the Zealoth. The collective requires these biological resources for our technological development. Our species' growth depends on access to unique organic compounds found only in these systems. Again, Huan asked follow-up questions that seemed perfectly normal. When you say technological development, could you help us understand what specific applications you're considering? This might help us find solutions that serve everyone's needs. The Zealoth delegation's response was immediate and telling. Several Zealoth representatives began rapid communication through their hive mind, their large eyes showing signs of stress. They were clearly debating whether answering Huan's question would reveal information that could be used against them later. Elder Vex spoke for the Morvani with characteristic elegance. The Morvani Federation asserts historical claim to these systems. Our ancestors discovered and first mapped these regions over 2,000 years ago. Traditional law supports our right to govern them. Huan's response revealed the first hint of his true skill. Historical claims are important, and the Morvani's long heritage deserves respect. I'm curious, though, in your experience, have you found that historical rights work best when they're combined with practical benefits for all parties involved? It was a masterful question. Huan had acknowledged the Morvani position while subtly suggesting that historical claims alone might not be enough. He had also introduced the idea that any solution should benefit everyone, which meant the Morvani would need to give something up. Elder Vex realized immediately what had happened. Huen had taken her strongest argument, historical precedent, and reframed it as just one factor among many to consider. Worse, he had done it in a way that made it sound like he was supporting her position. The morning session continued with each faction presenting detailed arguments for their positions. But as they spoke, Huan began weaving their statements together in ways that revealed contradictions and opportunities for compromise. When General Vex emphasized the Vorthak need for defensive materials, Huan asked about their manufacturing capabilities. When Drone Speaker Prime discussed biological research, Huan inquired about their production facilities. When Elder Vex talked about historical governance, Huan asked about administrative resources. By the lunch break, something remarkable had happened. Without anyone quite realizing how, Huan had gathered detailed information about each faction's industrial capabilities, resource needs, and strategic vulnerabilities. Information that went far beyond what was needed for the current dispute. During the break, Yuna approached Huan privately. "Did you realize what you just did in there?" "What do you mean?" "You got the Vorthak to reveal their weapons production capacity. You got the Zealoth to explain their biotechnology development process. You got the Morvani to detail their administrative systems." None of that was directly related to the mining dispute. Huan paused, considering this. "I was just trying to understand their positions so we could find areas of common ground." "Maybe," Yuna said. "But from their perspective, it probably looked like intelligence gathering." She was right. When the negotiations resumed after lunch, the alien delegations were noticeably more guarded. They had realized during the break that they had revealed more than they intended, but Huan adapted to their new caution with ease. If they wouldn't volunteer information, he would work with what they were willing to share. and what they were willing to share he would use to maximum advantage. I've been thinking about what everyone said this morning, Juan began. It seems to me that each faction has legitimate needs, but also valuable capabilities that could benefit the others. He activated a holographic display showing the disputed star systems. The Vorthik need defensive materials. The Zealoth need biological resources. The Morvani need respect for their historical claims. But what if we could structure an agreement where each faction's strengths help solve the other's problems? General. Vex leaned forward suspiciously. What do you mean? Well, the Vorthak have superior military logistics and security capabilities. The Zealoth have advanced biotechnology and resource processing. The Morvani have extensive administrative experience and established governance systems. Juan highlighted different systems on the display as he spoke. What if, instead of fighting over who controls these systems, we created a partnership where each faction contributed their expertise to develop the resources more efficiently? It sounded reasonable. It sounded fair. It sounded like the kind of compromise that could actually work. That was what made it so dangerous. Elder Vex was the first to see the trap. Ambassador, such an arrangement would require extensive coordination between our civilizations. New agreements, new oversight bodies, new administrative structures. True, Juan agreed. That's why I think we'd need a neutral party to help coordinate things. Someone trusted by all factions who could help ensure everyone's interests are protected. Drone Speaker Prime's collective consciousness processed this faster than the others. You are suggesting human oversight. Not oversight, Juan corrected gently. Coordination. A service role. Think of it as galactic project management. Kong, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke up. From a logistics standpoint, such coordination would require detailed knowledge of each faction's capabilities, supply chains, and operational procedures. The implications hit all three alien delegations simultaneously. A coordination role would give humans access to information about their most sensitive military and economic operations. It would make humanity the central hub through which all three factions would need to communicate and coordinate. This is unacceptable, General Vex said firmly. I agree, Drone Speaker Prime added. The Morvani Federation cannot support such an arrangement. Elder Vex stated, for the first time since the negotiations began, all three factions were in complete agreement. They were united in their opposition to Juan's proposal, which was exactly what Juan had been hoping for. I understand your concerns, he said calmly. Perhaps we should take a different approach. What if each faction maintained direct control over the systems most important to them, with negotiated access rights for the others? The mood in the room shifted immediately. After rejecting the coordination proposal, this new suggestion seemed much more reasonable by comparison. The alien delegations began to consider it seriously, but Yuna could see what Juan was doing. The coordination proposal had been intentionally extreme, designed to make the aliens reject it. Now, any alternative would seem moderate and acceptable in comparison. The rest of the afternoon was spent working out details of the new approach. Each faction would have primary control over specific systems, but would grant access rights to the others under negotiated terms. It required complex agreements about quotas, pricing, and transportation. Complex agreements that would need to be written, monitored, and enforced. Complex agreements that would require ongoing diplomatic relationships between all parties. Complex agreements that would make humanity an essential partner for all three factions. Since humans were the only neutral party trusted to help manage the process. As the day's session ended, the three alien delegations realized they had been outmaneuvered again. They had successfully avoided the obvious trap only to walk directly into a more subtle one. Elder Vex approached Juan as the delegates were leaving. You planned that coordination proposal from the beginning, didn't you? You knew we would reject it. Juan considered his answer carefully. Elder Vex, I proposed what I thought might work. When it became clear it wouldn't, I tried to find an alternative that addressed everyone's concerns. But you knew the alternative would benefit humanity. I hope it benefits everyone, Juan replied. That's what makes good agreements work. Elder Vex studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But Juan's expression showed only sincere concern for finding a peaceful solution. That was what made him so dangerous. He might actually believe he was just trying to help Dot as the aliens returned to their quarters to analyze the day's day. That evening, something unprecedented happened in the history of galactic diplomacy. 3 civilizations that had been on the brink of war sent private messages to each other, requesting a secret meeting without human presence. The meeting took place in a secured conference room in the station's neutral zone. General Vex, Drone Speaker Prime, and Elder Vex sat around a small table, their ancient enemies united by a common concern. We need to discuss the human problem, General Vex said without preamble. The warrior had never been one for diplomatic niceties, and tonight he was even more direct than usual. The collective agrees, Drone Speaker Prime responded. Our analysis of today's negotiations shows concerning patterns. Elder Vex activated a privacy screen around their table, ensuring their conversation could not be monitored. In 3,000 years of Morvani diplomatic experience, we have never encountered negotiation tactics like these. General Vex leaned forward. Explain. The human ambassador asks questions that seem innocent, but each answer gives them strategic information about our capabilities. They propose solutions that sound fair, but create dependencies that benefit humanity long-term. They make us feel like partners while maneuvering us into subordinate positions. The warrior speaks truth, Drone Speaker Prime agreed. The collective has run probability analysis on today's discussions. If we implement the human proposals, within 10 years humanity will have become essential to all 3 of our civilization's operations in this sector. General Vex brought up tactical displays on his personal device. Look at this, I've been studying human military history. They fight the same way they negotiate. They don't try to destroy their enemies, they make their enemies dependent on them. The display showed historical examples from Earth's past. The Marshall Plan after their Second World War, they rebuilt their former enemies' economies, but structured the aid so that those countries became economically tied to human markets. The European Union, they created a system where former enemies became so economically integrated that war between them became impossible. And now they're doing the same thing to us? Elder Vex said quietly. Drone Speaker Prime's collective consciousness processed thousands of data points simultaneously. The pattern is consistent across all human diplomatic activities since first contact. They do not conquer, they integrate. They do not dominate, they become indispensable. But how do they do it? General Vex asked. I've fought wars for centuries. I understand military strategy, but this is something different. Elder Vex called up historical records from the Morvani archives. We believe it comes from their species' unique evolutionary history. Most intelligent species evolved from herd animals or pack hunters or solitary predators. Humans evolved from social omnivores who survived through cooperation and resource sharing. She highlighted key data points. Their brains are wired for complex social relationships. They instinctively understand how to build networks of mutual dependence. What seems like manipulation to us is simply how their minds naturally work. The collective has studied human brain patterns, Drone Speaker Prime added. They process social information differently than other species. When they negotiate, they simultaneously consider dozens of relationship variables that we don't even recognize as factors. General Vex was frustrated. So how do we fight against it? That's the problem, Elder Vex said. You can't fight against it because they're not actually fighting. They're genuinely trying to create solutions that work for everyone. The fact that those solutions always benefit humanity more than anyone else appears to be unintentional. Unintentional? General Vex's voice was skeptical. We believe Ambassador Juan truly thinks he's being fair and helpful. The bias toward human advantage is built into how his species thinks about problems. They can't help but see opportunities that others miss. Drone Speaker Prime shared data from the collective's analysis. Consider today's negotiations. When the ambassador asked about our production capabilities, he was gathering information. But from his perspective, he was trying to understand our needs so he could help us. The fact that this information could be used strategically probably never occurred to him, which makes it even more dangerous, Elder Vex said. You can defend against deliberate manipulation? But how do you defend against someone who is genuinely trying to help you while unconsciously outmaneuvering you? The three leaders sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the implications. They were facing a species that had turned cooperation itself into a form of conquest. What are our options? General Vex finally asked. We could withdraw from the negotiations, Elder Vex suggested. Resume our original conflict and settle it through traditional means. The collective calculates a 73% probability of galactic war if negotiations fail, Drone Speaker Prime reported. Unacceptable losses for all parties. We could limit human involvement, General Vex said. Restrict them to observer status. But they've already gathered significant information about our capabilities, Elder Vex pointed out. And we specifically requested their participation. Limiting their role now would be seen as an insult, potentially making humanity an enemy rather than a neutral party. Drone Speaker Prime processed additional scenarios. The collective sees a third option. We could attempt to use human negotiation methods against them. Explain, General Vex said. Humans excel at finding win-win solutions, but they may be vulnerable to their own methods. If we could present proposals that appear to benefit everyone, including humanity, but actually limit human advantages, Elder Vex considered this. It's theoretically possible. Humans do seem to have blind spots in their strategic thinking. They focus so heavily on building relationships that they sometimes miss immediate threats. What kind of blind spots? General, Vex asked. They assume other species think the way they do, Elder Vex explained. They expect others to want long-term partnerships and mutual benefits. They don't consider that some species might prefer clear, limited agreements with minimal, ongoing relationships. The collective agrees, Drone Speaker Prime said. Human proposals consistently involve ongoing cooperation and shared governance. They seem unable to conceive of agreements that create temporary alliances without permanent connections. General Vex began to see possibilities. So if we could propose an agreement that gives humans what they think they want, but limits their ability to expand their influence ... Precisely, Elder Vex said. But it would need to be subtle. If they recognize what we're doing, they'll adapt. Their negotiation style is remarkably flexible. They spent the next hour developing a strategy. Instead of responding to human proposals, they would create their own. Instead of allowing Juan to guide the negotiations, they would present him with carefully crafted options designed to limit human expansion while appearing to offer partnership opportunities. There's one more thing we need to consider, Elder Vex said as their meeting concluded. The humans aren't just negotiating this conflict. They're positioning themselves for future opportunities we haven't even imagined yet. What do you mean? General Vex asked. Today's agreements will create precedents for how disputes are resolved throughout the galaxy. If humanity becomes the standard mediator for interstellar conflicts, they'll eventually have influence over every major political relationship in known space. The implications were staggering. The three leaders realized they weren't just negotiating over mining rights. They were potentially determining the future balance of power in the galaxy. Tomorrow we change our approach, General Vex declared. We stop reacting to human proposals and start making our own. Agreed, Elder Vex said, but we must be careful. Underestimating human adaptability has been the mistake of every species that has negotiated with them. The collective will monitor all interaction patterns, Drone Speaker Prime promised. We must not allow emotion or pride to compromise our strategy. As they returned to their respective quarters, each leader understood that the next day's negotiations would be crucial. They had identified the human advantage and developed a strategy to counter it, but deep down, they all suspected that tomorrow's session would reveal just how dangerous it was to compete with humans at their own game. The humans had been refining their negotiation techniques for 50,000 years of tribal politics, agricultural settlements, city-states, nations, and global diplomacy. The aliens were about to discover that trying to out-negotiate humanity was like challenging them to a contest in breathing, technically possible, but inadvisable. Still, they had to try. The alternative was accepting human dominance of galactic politics, and none of their civilizations were prepared for that outcome. Tomorrow would determine whether ancient wisdom and careful planning could overcome instinctive human talent for turning enemies into friends and friends into partners. The galaxy's future hung in the balance. And for the first time since the negotiations began, the three alien civilizations had a plan. The next morning's session began differently. Instead of waiting for Juan to guide the discussion, Elder Vex stood and activated a holographic display before the human ambassador could speak. With respect to the human delegation, the three factions have been discussing the situation overnight, she announced. We would like to present a unified proposal for resolving this conflict. Juan was surprised but pleased. That's excellent news. A unified approach should make finding a solution much easier. But as Elder Vex began outlining their proposal, Juan realized something had changed. The three alien factions weren't just cooperating, they were coordinating their strategy specifically to limit human involvement. We propose a three-way partition of the disputed systems, Elder Vex said. Each faction will receive direct control over systems that best match their stated needs. The Vorthek will control systems with defensive mineral resources. The Zealoth will control systems with biological resources. The Morvani will control systems with historical significance. General X took over the presentation. Each faction will maintain complete sovereignty over their assigned systems. No shared governance, no ongoing coordination requirements, no external oversight. Drone Speaker Prime added the final element. Trade between factions will be conducted through standard galactic commerce protocols. No special agreements, no preferential relationships, no permanent partnerships. It was a clean, simple solution that gave each faction exactly what they had said they wanted. It was also designed to completely exclude human involvement. Once the initial agreement was signed, Juan studied the proposal carefully. From a diplomatic standpoint, it was actually quite good. Each faction got their core needs met, and the potential for future conflicts was minimized through clear boundaries and simple trade relationships, but something bothered him about it. This is a very thorough proposal, he said finally. Can I ask a few questions to make sure I understand the details? Of course, Elder Vex replied, though her tone was more cautious than welcoming. The partition seems fair on the surface, but I'm wondering about long-term sustainability. Have you considered how changes in each faction's needs might affect the agreement over time? General Vex answered quickly. The agreement includes provisions for renegotiation every 50 years, standard diplomatic practice. And what happens if one faction needs resources controlled by another before the next renegotiation period? Standard galactic trade protocols, Drone Speaker Prime replied. Market-based pricing, delivery through established shipping routes, payment in standard galactic currency. Juan nodded, making notes. But his questions were revealing something the aliens hadn't considered. Their proposal was designed to work in the current situation, but it didn't account for the dynamic nature of galactic politics. What about security? Kung asked, speaking up for the first time. These systems are on the border between your territories. If external threats emerge, how would you coordinate defense? The three alien delegations exchanged glances. They had focused so intently on limiting human involvement that they hadn't fully considered the military implications of their proposal. Each faction would be responsible for defending their own systems, General Vex said slowly. But what if the threat is too large for any one faction to handle alone? Kong pressed. Pirates, raiders, hostile aliens from outside the galaxy? We would coordinate as needed, Elder Vex said, but her uncertainty was obvious. Yuna joined the questioning. I'm also curious about the biological and environmental aspects. Some of these systems have interconnected ecosystems. If the Zilith modify biological resources in their systems, it could affect mineral formation in neighboring Vorthak systems. The Zealot delegation had not considered this possibility. Their biotechnology could indeed have unintended consequences that crossed system boundaries. And then there's the economic factor, Juan continued. Independent control might be less efficient than coordinated development. You might actually get more resources through cooperation than through isolation. Despite their preparation, the alien factions found themselves being drawn back into the complex discussions they had tried to avoid. Every simple answer revealed new complications that required more detailed planning, but this time they recognized what was happening and tried to resist. Ambassador Juan, Elder Vex said firmly, "We appreciate your analysis, but the three factions are satisfied with this approach. We believe simplicity is preferable to complexity in this situation." "Of course," Juan replied. "I'm just trying to make sure we've considered all the implications. Would it be helpful if I prepared a detailed analysis of potential challenges and how they might be addressed?" "That won't be necessary," General Vex said quickly. "Actually," Drone Speaker Prime interjected, "the collective would find such an analysis useful for our planning purposes." General Vex shot the Zealot representative a sharp look. The Vorthak had wanted to avoid giving humans any excuse for continued involvement, but the Zilith collective mind was curious about potential problems they might have overlooked. "Perhaps a brief overview," Elder Vex compromised, "but nothing that would require ongoing human participation in implementation." "Absolutely," Juan agreed. "Just some observations that might help you refine the proposal." Over the next hour, Juan provided exactly what he had promised, a thoughtful analysis of potential challenges in the alien proposal. But as he spoke, something interesting happened. Each problem he identified suggested solutions that would require exactly the kind of cooperation and coordination the aliens had tried to avoid. Security concerns could be addressed through joint defense agreements. Economic inefficiencies could be solved through shared development projects. Environmental issues could be managed through intersystem monitoring and cooperation. "These are all theoretical problems," General Vex said when Juan finished. "They may never occur." "True," Juan agreed. "But in my experience, it's usually better to have solutions ready than to try to develop them during a crisis." "And what solutions do you suggest?" Elder Vex asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Well, you could include contingency clauses in the main agreement," Juan said. "Procedures to follow if any of these situations arise. That way, you'd have frameworks for cooperation without permanent obligations." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like exactly the kind of practical planning that responsible governments should do. It was also a trap contingency clauses would require detailed planning about how the three factions would work together in various scenarios. That planning would require ongoing communication and coordination. And since the scenarios were complex and unpredictable, they would need a neutral party to help facilitate the planning process. "We could schedule regular review meetings," Yuna suggested helpfully. "Maybe annually, just to assess whether any of the contingency situations are developing. And we could establish communication protocols," Kang added, "so that if problems arise, all three factions know how to contact each other quickly." "These are minor additions to the main agreement," Juan concluded. "They wouldn't change the basic structure of your proposal at all." But the three alien leaders realized that these minor additions would fundamentally alter the nature of their agreement. Instead of a clean partition with minimal ongoing relationships, they would be creating a complex web of contingencies, reviews, and communication requirements, and at the center of that web would be humanity, the neutral party trusted by all sides to help manage the process. Elder Vex looked at her fellow faction leaders and saw her own realization reflected in their faces. They had tried to outnegotiate the humans and had walked directly into a more sophisticated version of the same trap they had been trying to avoid. "Perhaps we should take a recess to consider these suggestions," she said. "Of course," Juan replied. "Take all the time you need. We're here to help however we can." As the three alien delegations left the conference hall, they faced an uncomfortable truth. They had just experienced a demonstration of exactly why aliens throughout the galaxy had learned to fear human involvement in peace talks. The humans hadn't rejected their proposal. They hadn't criticized it or tried to replace it with something else. They had simply asked thoughtful questions and offered helpful suggestions, and somehow, through that process of helpful analysis, they had transformed a simple agreement designed to exclude human involvement into a complex partnership that would make humanity indispensable to all three factions. How do they do it? General Vex asked his advisors as they returned to their private meeting room. It's their questions, one advisor replied. They ask about things we hadn't considered, which makes us realize we need to consider them. But once we start trying to address their concerns, we end up needing their help to solve the problems they identified. The collective is beginning to understand, Drone Speaker Prime reported to his fellow Zealoth. Humans do not manipulate, they illuminate. They show us complexities that were always present but that we had chosen to ignore. Once illuminated, these complexities require solutions. And humans are very good at providing solutions. Elder Vex explained it to her delegation in historical terms. It's like the ancient military strategy of revealing enemy weaknesses. The humans show us weaknesses in our plans that we didn't know. The alien faction spent their recess in a state of controlled panic. In their private meeting room, the three leaders faced the reality that their carefully planned counter-strategy had not only failed, but had actually made their situation worse. We gave them exactly what they wanted, General Vex said, his voice heavy with frustration. We tried to be clever and we ended up making ourselves look foolish. Elder Vex called up strategic analyzes on her personal device. The humans didn't even have to manipulate us. We manipulated ourselves by trying to anticipate their moves. The collective calculates that our proposal, as modified by human suggestions, gives humanity more influence than any of their original ideas, Drone Speaker Prime reported. We have achieved the opposite of our intentions. The three leaders sat in silence, each processing the implications of their failure. They had been outmaneuvered by a species that might not even realize they were maneuvering. What are our options now? General Vex asked. We could reject all modifications and insist on our original proposal, Elder Vex suggested. But now that the humans have pointed out the flaws, we can't pretend they don't exist, Drone Speaker Prime replied. Our own people will question why we're ignoring obvious problems. We could try to address the problems ourselves without human involvement, General Vex said. How? Elder Vex asked. The humans are right about the complexity. Joint defense, agreements, environmental monitoring, economic coordination. These things require exactly the kind of ongoing cooperation that humanity specializes in facilitating. The truth was becoming clear to all three leaders. The humans had revealed that their simple partition plan was actually naive and potentially dangerous. Now that they understood the complexity of what they were trying to accomplish, they needed the very expertise they had been trying to avoid. There's something else, Elder Vex said quietly. I've been thinking about what the human ambassador said about long-term sustainability. He's right. Our proposal works for today's needs, but it doesn't account for how things might change over the next century. She brought up predictive models on the holographic display. Population growth, technological development, resource depletion, external threats, all of these factors could make our current agreement obsolete within decades. The General Vex studied the projections. So we need an agreement that can adapt to changing circumstances, which requires ongoing communication, regular reviews, and flexible implementation, Drone Speaker Prime concluded. Exactly what the humans have been suggesting. The leaders realized they faced a fundamental problem. The humans hadn't created the complexity. They had simply revealed complexity that was already there. The galaxy was a complicated place, and any agreement that ignored that complexity was doomed to fail. We've been thinking about this wrong, Elder Vex said suddenly. We've been treating human involvement as a threat to avoid rather than a resource to manage. Explain, General Vex said. The humans are going to influence galactic politics whether we include them or not. They're too good at building relationships and creating opportunities. Our choice isn't whether to deal with human influence, it's whether to have that influence working with us or around us. The implications were sobering. By trying to exclude humanity from their agreement, they might force the humans to find other ways to achieve their objectives. Ways that could be more disruptive to the existing balance of power. The collective agrees with this analysis, Drone Speaker Prime said. Human influence in galactic affairs has grown consistently since first contact. This growth continues regardless of whether other species cooperate or resist. So our real choice is between controlled human involvement that serves our interests or uncontrolled human influence that serves their interests, General Vex concluded. Precisely, Elder Vex said. And if we structure their involvement correctly, we might actually benefit from their expertise while limiting their advantages. It was a risky strategy, but it might be their only option. Instead of trying to exclude humans, they could try to channel human involvement in directions that serve their purposes. How would that work? General Vex asked. Elder Vex began outlining possibilities. We could propose specific roles for human involvement that are useful but limited. Technical advisory positions rather than decision-making authority. Facilitation services rather than oversight responsibilities. The humans might not accept such restrictions, Drone Speaker Prime pointed out. They might, Elder Vex replied. Remember, they seem to genuinely believe they're being helpful. If we present limited roles as opportunities to serve galactic peace, they might accept them enthusiastically. General Vex was skeptical. And what happens when they start expanding those roles through their usual methods? We monitor carefully and adjust as needed, Elder Vex said. The key is to stay ahead of their influence rather than react to it. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than their current situation. They had tried to outmaneuver the humans and failed. Now they would try to work with human nature rather than against it. When the negotiations resumed, the three alien delegations presented a modified version of their proposal. They accepted the need for contingency planning and ongoing cooperation, but they structured human involvement in very specific ways. We would like to establish a technical advisory council, Elder Vex announced. This council would include human representatives along with experts from all three factions. Its role would be to provide analysis and recommendations, but not to make binding decisions. Juan listened carefully as they outlined their proposal. It was cleverly designed to give humans a role while limiting their authority. The advisory council would have access to information and the ability to influence decisions, but final authority would remain with the individual factions. This sounds like a thoughtful approach, Juan said when they finished. Can I ask a few questions about implementation? The alien leaders braced themselves. They knew that human questions had a way of revealing complications they hadn't considered. How? Would the advisory council handle situations where the three factions disagree on the best course of action? Juan asked. It was exactly the kind of question they had feared. The three leaders exchanged glances, realizing they hadn't fully thought through the decision-making process. The council would provide multiple options for consideration, Elder Vex said carefully. But what if time is critical and the factions can't reach consensus quickly? Kong asked. Military threats, natural disasters, economic crises, these situations might require immediate action. In emergencies, each faction would act independently to protect their own interests, General Vex replied. That could lead to conflicting actions that make the crisis worse, Yuna pointed out. Especially if the emergency affects multiple systems. The aliens found themselves once again discussing complications they had tried to avoid. Emergency protocols, dispute resolution procedures, communication hierarchies, each question revealed new layers of complexity. Perhaps the advisory council could have temporary decision-making authority during declared emergencies. Drone Speaker Prime suggested. Elder Vex realized immediately what had happened. In trying to address human concerns about their proposal, they had just given the advisory council, which would include Human representatives, exactly the kind of authority they had been trying to limit. That seems reasonable, Juan agreed. Though we'd need clear criteria for what constitutes an emergency and how such authority would be activated. Of course, General Vex said weakly. As the discussion continued, the aliens watched there carefully. Crafted limitations being transformed into expansive authorities. The Advisory Council's role grew from providing recommendations to managing emergencies to coordinating long-term planning. By the end of the session, they had created exactly the kind of ongoing human involvement they had spent days trying to prevent. I think we're making excellent progress, Juan said as the day's negotiations concluded. This framework should provide the stability and flexibility needed for long-term success. The three alien leaders nodded agreement, but their expressions showed a mixture of resignation and admiration. They had been outmaneuvered again, but this time they understood exactly how it had happened. The humans had taken their proposed limitations and shown them to be insufficient for the complex realities of galactic politics. Every restriction they had tried to impose had been revealed as a potential source of problems that required more sophisticated solutions. Tomorrow we should work out the final details, Elder Vex said. I'm looking forward to it, Juan replied sincerely. As the delegations prepared to leave, General Vex approached Juan privately. Ambassador, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you realize what you've accomplished here? Juan looked genuinely puzzled. I hope we found a framework for peace that serves everyone's interests. We came here to limit human involvement in our affairs. Instead, we've created a structure that makes human participation essential to everything we do. Juan considered this. I hope that's because we've found ways for our species to work together effectively. Cooperation usually produces better results than isolation. General Vex studied the human ambassador's face, looking for signs of deception or calculation. But Juan's expression showed only sincere. The final day of negotiations arrived with a sense of inevitability that hung over Nexus Prime like morning fog. The three alien factions had spent the night making final preparations for signing an agreement that would formally end their conflict and establish humanity as the central coordinator of their future relationships. The treaty signing ceremony was scheduled for the afternoon, giving the delegations one last morning to review the details. But as the various representatives gathered in the conference hall, the atmosphere was strangely subdued for what should have been a celebration of peace. Juan noticed the mood immediately. Is something troubling about the final agreement? He asked Elder Vex during a brief private conversation. Elder Vex looked at him with an expression that mixed admiration, frustration, and something that might have been fear. Ambassador, may I speak candidly? Of course. Your species terrifies us. Juan was genuinely shocked. I'm sorry to hear that. Have we done something to cause offense? No, Elder Vex replied quietly. That's exactly the problem. You haven't done anything wrong. In fact, you've done everything right. You've been helpful, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to finding peaceful solutions. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But in the process of being helpful, you've accomplished something that conquest could never achieve. You've made 3 of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations dependent on human expertise and coordination. I hope we've created partnerships that benefit everyone, Juan said. And that's what makes it so frightening, Elder Vex continued. You don't seem to understand that you've just revolutionized galactic politics. This agreement doesn't just solve our immediate conflict. It establishes humanity as the preferred mediator for interstellar disputes. Juan frowned. Is that a bad thing, if we can help prevent wars? Other civilizations are already sending observers to study these negotiations, Elder Vex explained. Word is spreading throughout the galaxy that humans have successfully mediated a 3-way conflict that could have destroyed half the known worlds. She activated a holographic display showing communication traffic around Nexus Prime. Do you see these data streams? Reports about human negotiation methods are being transmitted to every major civilization in the galaxy. Within months, you'll have requests for mediation from dozens of species. The implications began to dawn on Juan. and each successful mediation would establish more precedents for human involvement in galactic affairs, Elder Vex finished. Within a generation, humanity could be the central hub of all interstellar politics. Juan was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Is that what you're afraid of? Human political dominance? We're afraid because we don't think you understand what you're doing, Elder Vex said. Your species has a talent for making peace that's more powerful than any weapon. But you seem to think you're just being helpful neighbors. She gestured toward the conference hall where the other delegations were reviewing final documents. In there we have 3 military leaders who have spent centuries fighting wars. Today, they're going to sign an agreement that makes them partners in a human-coordinated alliance. They know they've been outmaneuvered, but they can't figure out how to resist it because everything you've proposed actually makes sense. Maybe that's because cooperation really is better than conflict, Juan suggested. Maybe it is, Elder Vex agreed. But that doesn't make it less frightening for species who have spent millennia maintaining their independence through strength and isolation. The morning session was devoted to finalizing technical details. Juan worked with representatives from all 3 factions to establish communication protocols, emergency procedures, and coordination mechanisms for the new partnership. As they worked, Juan began to see the patterns that Elder Vex had described. Every technical detail required ongoing human involvement. Every procedure included human coordination. Every protocol made humanity more essential to the relationship between the 3 factions. But what bothered him was that all of these requirements seemed genuinely necessary. The 3 civilizations had different communication systems, different decision-making processes, and different cultural approaches to cooperation. Without neutral coordination, their partnership would likely fail. Are we creating unnecessary complexity? He asked Yuna privately during a break. I don't think so, she replied. I've been studying the biological and psychological profiles of all 3 species. They really do need this level of coordination to work together effectively. She brought up comparative data on her device. The Vorthic make decisions through military hierarchy and direct commands. The Zelith use collective consensus that can take days to reach. The Morvani rely on historical precedent and elaborate consultation processes. Without a neutral party to translate between these different approaches, they'd never be able to coordinate anything. Kong joined their conversation. From the strategic standpoint, the coordination requirements aren't artificial either. These 3 civilizations have been enemies for centuries. They don't trust each other enough to share critical information directly. They need a trusted intermediary. And somehow that intermediary turned out to be us, Juan said. It makes sense, Kong replied. We're the only major power that doesn't have historical conflicts with any of them. We're new enough that we don't carry old grudges, but established enough that we have credibility. As the afternoon ceremony approached, delegations from other galactic civilizations began arriving at Nexus Prime, the Altarian Confederacy, the Rigel Commonwealth, the Centauri Alliance, and a dozen smaller powers had sent observers to witness the historic agreement. Juan realized that Elder Vex had been right. This ceremony wasn't just about ending one conflict, it was about establishing new patterns for how galactic disputes would be resolved in the future. The signing ceremony took place in the main hall, with representatives from across the galaxy watching. General Vex, Drone Speaker Prime, and Elder Vex each added their formal endorsements to the agreement, creating the Tripartite Cooperation Accords. As Juan signed as the witness and coordinator, he noticed the reactions of the alien observers. Some looked impressed by humanity's diplomatic success. Others looked worried about the implications for their own civilizations. A few looked like they were already planning to request human mediation for their own disputes. After the formal ceremony, there was a reception where delegates could discuss the implications of the new agreement. Juan found himself surrounded by alien diplomats asking questions about human mediation techniques and requesting informal advice about their own conflicts. Ambassador Juan, said Kel, a representative from the Rigel Commonwealth, we've been following these negotiations with great interest. The Rigel Commonwealth has been having difficulties with the Deneb Trade Union over shipping rights. Would humanity consider providing mediation services? Before Juan could answer, another alien diplomat spoke up. The Altarian Confederacy would also appreciate human assistance with our border dispute with the Proxima Collective. And the Centauri Alliance has been seeking neutral arbitration for our resource-sharing agreement with the Volpac systems, added a third diplomat. Juan looked around and realized that half the galaxy's diplomatic problems were being presented to him at a cocktail party. Each conflict seemed to require exactly the kind of neutral coordination that humanity had provided in the current negotiations. Elder Vex appeared at his side. Now, do you see what I meant about revolutionizing galactic politics? This is what you were afraid of, Juan said, watching more alien diplomats approach with requests for assistance. This is what we were trying to prevent, Elder Vex confirmed. But now that it's happening, we have to decide whether to resist it or try to manage it. What do you recommend? Elder Vex was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I recommend that your species be very careful about what you're building here. The power to make peace is the power to shape the future. Your people need to understand the responsibility that comes with that capability. As the reception continued, Juan began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. The successful resolution of the tripartite crisis had established humanity as the galaxy's preferred diplomatic intermediary. But it had also made Earth responsible for maintaining peace between civilizations that had been fighting for millennia. The final irony came when General Vex approached him near the end of the evening. Ambassador, I wanted to thank you for what you've accomplished here, the Vorthek leader said. Thank you, General. I hope the agreement serves your people well. It will, General Vex replied. But I also wanted to give you some advice from one leader to another. I'd welcome your thoughts. General Vex looked around the reception hall, watching alien diplomats from dozens of civilizations, discussing their problems and looking toward the human delegation for solutions. Your species has a gift for making enemies into friends, he said. But be careful that you don't make so many friends that you forget how to say no. The galaxy is full of conflicts, and they're not all worth your involvement. What do you mean? I mean that some species will try to use human mediation not to solve their problems, but to gain advantages over their neighbors. Some conflicts are better left unresolved than resolved badly. And some civilizati